my customers that just drove past said, you know, last man standing. That's probably the true statement, really. 307 remain unchanged.
Opposite is a craft beer.
Because there are still over 20,000 people living in homes with...
The occupation...
Hello everybody, I hope you're all well. So today's video is the second part to my working class series. If you guys want to check out the first part, the demonisation of the working class, I would highly recommend checking that video out before you watch this one. Today's video is going to be all about not only gentrification but also the appropriation of the working class aesthetic, particularly amongst middle to upper class young people. Now I do just want to preface a few things before I get started into this video. My last video got quite a bit of traction, which was great, but obviously that came with a lot of criticism, and I am listening and learning. I'm still new to sort of the social / political commentary YouTube scene. So for this video I've used multiple books, articles and documentaries to research rather than just one book like I did in my last video. I definitely found this video, especially the segment about gentrification, so challenging, because gentrification, despite it being the same process of changing an area to accommodate to the middle and upper classes whilst pushing out the lower class, gentrification happens in so many different ways in different countries and cities and neighbourhoods, so I did find it really challenging. And before I get started, I'd highly recommend all of you guys to go and follow my Instagram. I've been posting a lot of my favourite documentaries on there and all my favourite films and all that good stuff, but also I'm starting a new series exclusive to IGTV where a week after I've uploaded a video I will respond to comments, keep the debate and the conversation going, because that's what commentary is all about. And I'll also be posting about sort of the creative process behind my videos, the researching, the planning, the scripting, the editing, the filming, because I do actually get a lot of questions about it, so make sure you guys go and follow my Instagram if you don't already.
So who do you think London's for now?
When they say and chaos ensued, that's about it. That just about hits it right on the head.
So the definition of gentrification is when an area is redeveloped and upgraded, attracting richer people and often displacing poorer tenants. Richer people will move into more expensive modern accommodation. Like I said, the reason I found this video so challenging to just research and even understand is because gentrification doesn't seem to happen in the same way amongst different neighborhoods, cities and countries. Everything seems to range from who started it to state and government involvement. I did a majority of my research on London gentrification on the internet. I watched two documentaries, The Street and The War to Live in London, and I also read the book The Voices of Bristol, which was all about Bristolian gentrification. And I also read How to Kill a City. This focuses on gentrification in the US, in particular New Orleans, Detroit, San Francisco and New York. And as I was sort of researching and reading this book, despite both countries partaking in the same process, it made me realise how drastically different the processes were, despite it leading to the same outcome. Gentrification isn't a particularly new phenomenon. The term was coined by Ruth Glass in 1964 to describe the changes that were occurring in London at the time. One by one, many of the working class quarters of London have been invaded by the middle classes, upper and lower. Once this process of gentrification starts in a district, it goes on rapidly until all or most of the original working class occupiers are displaced and the whole social character of the district has changed. In 1979, Professor Philip Clay actually outlined what he believed to be 4 distinct phases that occur during gentrification. So the first phase is when individuals who aren't supported by any sort of government or institution start to move into poorer neighbourhoods with the intention of renovating their house. They'll usually move into the area and live in the house anyway, but they see the house as more of an investment to make money later than as a place to live. There is little media coverage of the area, and people start to sort of hear about the sort of up and coming area through word of mouth. The second phase is when people who were attracted to the area because of the slight change start buying up real estate to sell on for more later. The media start paying attention at this point and sort of start calling it, you know, an up and coming area. And this is when displacement starts because landlords realise they can hike the rents up now that the middle classes are moving in more and more. Although this is a common way that gentrification occurs, gentrification in areas like Detroit are often sponsored by the state and other large institutions rather than individuals just moving into a low income area. The third phase is when middle class gentrifiers start playing a much bigger role in gentrifying an area. They'll often tell outsiders that it's a great place to move, it's gotten so much better. Banks start lending money to previously de-invested neighbourhoods, and even the government start getting involved in improving these areas. You can even tell when an area starts to be gentrified, potholes that have been in the roads for years suddenly start getting filled now that the middle class are moving in there. And often these improvements are done at the request of real estate developers. And speaking of real estate developers, rather than just individuals buying one house and renovating it to sell it on later, real estate developers will start buying plots of land or houses and developing middle class properties. Police and security presence start to increase in these areas to ensure that the middle class newcomers feel safe, and this is where the sort of divide between the old tenants and the new tenants begin. The fourth phase is when the neighbourhood, which has already been gentrified, just starts to get more and more wealthy. Properties that were held vacant by developers now start being developed into expensive condos. Displacement is at an all-time high, and the neighbourhoods around this gentrified neighbourhood usually begin either phase 1 of gentrification or they're already onto phase 2. These phases of gentrification, although they are accurate, they aren't accurate for all cases. Some researchers even believe in adding a fifth phase to gentrification, because gentrification now is no longer about individuals or even real estate developers trying to make money. It's become a lot more than that. There is a rise of what some call super gentrification, which is the development of multi-million pound properties. And these multi-million pound properties are created for billionaires, not for them to live in, but rather for them to invest their money in. This is especially popular over here in London. If you guys aren't from the UK and don't know this, there is a huge property crisis going on in London at the moment. There's not necessarily a shortage of properties, but it's the fact that no one can afford to buy any of them. Laughs through the pain. Let me just break it down a little bit further for you guys. Obviously, normal gentrification occurs here in London in places like Hackney, Camden and Islington, which were once run down, rough areas, have now become hubs for the middle class to open up their hipster coffee shops and their craft beer shops and their vintage bike stores. And all of these businesses open up to appease to the middle class residents. I will elaborate more on the harmful effects of gentrification later in this video, but not only does normal gentrification occur here in London, but there's also super gentrification. Billionaires and investors from overseas will buy multi-million pound properties not to live in, but to invest their money in places like Chelsea, for example. And the reason for this is because the UK is known for their very relaxed tax laws. So not only are the working class residents of London being pushed out, but even the middle and upper classes are being pushed out of London because they're actually being priced out by multi-millionaire investors and billionaires who will invest their money into these multi-million pound properties not to live in, but rather to invest in. And what this has done is this has created a market for multi-million pound properties which only the top 1%, top 0.1%, top 0.01% can afford. Now this is very clear in Chelsea and Kensington because there is over 1.5 billion pounds worth of properties that are empty. So not only does this affect the middle to upper classes who are pushed out of their areas, but also the businesses there are no longer viable because all these properties are being bought by people who don't live there. Gentrification and super gentrification are actually sort of caused by the same motive, which is people seeing houses as rather than places to live, but places to invest their money in and make more money. Anyways, back onto the conversation of gentrification. In this video, I am going to be focusing mostly on gentrification in London. If you guys want to know more about gentrification, in particular in the States, I would highly recommend reading the book How to Kill a City, because they focus on, like I said, Detroit, New Orleans, San Francisco and New York. And this isn't to say that the British government don't have any involvement in gentrification. They're extremely guilty of approving regeneration projects, and these regeneration projects usually end in council house tenants being evicted, council estates being demolished, and developers building upmarket apartment complexes to sell to the upper and middle classes. One example of this was the demolition of Haygate Estate, which was done in the regeneration project of Elephant and Castle. This country has a huge problem when it comes to a shortage of social housing. The reason for this being a combination of the right to buy scheme and also not enough council houses being built. But it's unbelievable that the government know about this shortage and know the thousands of people on social housing waiting lists, yet proceed to demolish council estates and let real estate developers buy the land and build these upmarket complexes to gentrify an area. Gentrification isn't entirely the fault of the government, although the government do play a ridiculously huge part in it, such as not building enough social housing and demolishing council estates. And they especially seem to pander to gentrification and fail to protect the working class and lower income residents of gentrifying areas. But we also need to focus on the middle class gentrifiers that are moving into these low income areas, who are buying houses just to renovate them and to sell them on for more later, or are starting their businesses in low income areas. And we need to sort of discuss the large impact that middle class gentrifiers have on these areas. It is difficult to sort of place where gentrification truly starts in one particular area, but one way is usually young middle class adults moving to low income areas like Hackney or Elephant and Castle, not with the intention of integrating themselves into the community, but rather the intention of doing their house up and selling it for more later on. You know, it's very common to see people open their businesses up, such as a hipster coffee shop or a craft beer store, and they'll open their businesses up in low income areas, but rather than cater to the low income residents that live there, their target audience is the middle class. And by the target audience being the middle class, what I mean by that is usually their products or services can only be afforded by the middle class because of the price point. But also the product itself, things like hipster coffee shops or craft beer stores, aren't very appealing to someone who's been living in a low income area for the past 30 years. And whether it's a conscious or subconscious decision, when you're opening a business which only caters to the middle class and only appeals to the middle class, you'll start attracting more and more of the middle class to not only sort of hang around in this area, but also to move there. And landlords will start clocking onto middle class residents moving into the area at a faster pace and will start hiking the rents up. I mean, in my opinion, abolish landlords, please. I'm not saying that if you're middle class or you live in the suburbs, not to move to a low income area if it's all you can afford. Obviously, I understand that. But if you're moving into a low income area for the sole purpose of taking advantage of its cheapness by renovating your house and selling it on for more later, or starting a business in a low income area which is only suited to the middle and upper classes, then what you're doing, if I'm going to be frankly honest, isn't right, and you are completely contributing to gentrification and displacement. In particular, a lot of people who set up middle class businesses in low income areas, such as setting up a hipster coffee shop where a latte costs £5 or an upmarket bakery, think that they're helping the area by adding some sort of culture. But if your business is not suited to the low income residents who were there in the first place, then you're not helping benefiting anyone but the middle class. If you're moving into a low income area, you need to somewhat contribute to the community rather than alienating them even further. And instead of contributing to the community, they just make their own and push out the low income community that made it possible for them to even start their business in the first place. So I believe there's sort of two key ways that gentrification can be stopped. The first one being the government actually caring about low income individuals, hint, they don't, and to stop looking at homes as investments and as ways to make money. Look at homes as places for people to live. And if you're going to set up a business in a low income area, then please, for the love of Christ, make it available to the low income people that lived there first. I would highly recommend watching the documentary The Street. It was filmed over 4 years in Hackney, in particular in Hoxton, and focused on the gentrification in that area. It really puts into perspective how quickly gentrification occurs, and not only that, but also how aggressively persistent a lot of these developers are to buy properties off of the locals. And this documentary also shows how the locals who have lived in this area for a majority of their life, how they actually feel about it. Gentrification is often described as social cleansing. Social cleansing can be understood as a geographical project made up of processes, practices and policies designed to remove council estate residents from space and place, what we call a new accumulative form of state-led gentrification. Social cleansing is often done through attacks on social housing, such as demolishing council estates and selling land to upmarket property developers. And I'm also just going to read out a few sort of key figures and facts. Since 1997, 54,263 units have either been demolished or are slated for demolition on council estates of more than 100 units in London. A conservative estimate is that 135,658 households are being displaced. Council properties are being further decimated through the right to buy scheme. An example of this was the demolition of Haygate Estate in Suffolk. More than 1,200 council properties were torn down between 2011 and 2014 and replaced by a luxury development called Elephant Park. Just 82 of the new 3,000 homes on site were for social rent. The government pandering to gentrification, either through demolishing social housing, not building enough social houses, and neglecting the social housing which already exists, not only leads to displacement, but it can also lead to death. Grenfell Tower was a 24-storey block of flats in West London. It was built by the council. 14 of the flats had been bought through the right to buy scheme and were being rented out by private landlords, and the rest of the flats were being managed by the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation. And may I just add that Grenfell Tower was actually built under one of the richest boroughs in London. Grenfell Tower went under renovation between 2015 and 2016. It was given a new water-based heat system, it was given new windows, and it was also covered in cladding. And despite all the money that was put into this renovation, no fire sprinklers were put into the tower block. If you guys don't know what cladding is, it's basically sort of a coating of material which is put around a building. The cladding that was put onto Grenfell Tower was aluminium composite rain screen cladding. According to the application, the purpose of the cladding was for heat and energy efficiency, but it was also to improve the external appearance of the tower block. There were alternative claddings with far better fire resistance, but they were turned down due to the cost. The residents of Grenfell Tower actually started a blog called the Grenfell Action Group, where they often expressed their safety concerns. Even before the flammable cladding was put onto the building in 2013, they were complaining about fire safety regulations, well, more the lack thereof. Firefighting equipment in the building had not been checked in over 4 years. The on-site extinguishers were expired, and in 2016 the group warned that people would struggle to escape from a fire because not only was there one entrance and one exit, but the corridors had also been allowed to fill up with rubbish. In June 2016, an independent assessor had highlighted 4 serious issues with fire safety, and that independent assessor recommended that action should be taken in weeks. And in October, that same assessor asked the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation why they hadn't sorted 20 of the 40 fire safety issues. On the 14th of June 2017, a fire broke out in the tower block. It was due to an electrical fault in one of the fridges in one of the flats. The fire spread extremely quickly due to the flammable cladding that was put on the building 2 years prior. 72 people died, but it is believed to be more. And the tragedy of Grenfell Tower not only highlights that gentrification is a class issue, but it is a racial issue also. An exact figure can't be measured, but a high amount of the residents living in Grenfell Tower were either ethnic minorities or immigrants. Their concerns over safety were ignored. Cheap flammable cladding was placed on a building full of ethnic minorities, immigrants and working class people by one of the richest boroughs in London. And the purpose of this cladding, which killed 72 people, was to just make the building look a little bit nicer. And there are still tower blocks in the UK to this day, despite Grenfell happening and 72 people dying, that had this same cheap flammable cladding, because the government did not want to cough up a little bit of extra money just to put non-flammable cladding on the building. Gentrification is not just about making areas middle class, it's about making areas more white. The government will try and make you believe through performative gestures that they care about the working class, that they care about people of colour, that they care about ethnic minorities, that they care about immigrants. But Grenfell, a completely preventable and foreseeable tragedy, is proof that the government do not care. What happened in Grenfell Tower is so relevant to the topic of gentrification because not only does it show the government focusing on the aesthetics of a building and covering a building in cheap flammable cladding to make it a little bit less of an eyesore, rather than focusing on the complete lack of fire and safety measures which were raised multiple times to the Chelsea and Kensington Management Organisation in one of the richest boroughs in London. I also read a very interesting article which I will link down below about the direct correlation between gentrification and crime. I'm just going to read a few quotes from the article. One of the issues young people have in Hackney Wick is the lack of aspiration, the lack of hope. They're all living in a rich, diverse city, but it still feels very separate to them. It's not their development, it's somebody else's. They think they won't be able to live in an area they were brought up in because they're not going to be able to spend £600,000 on an apartment. And the government will use these rise in crime rates to fearmonger the middle class residents, furthering the divide between the middle and lower classes living in the same area, and also leading to more hopelessness and lack of aspiration amongst working class youth.
No, I won't leave you here. We can run together. Listen, if we run together, they will shoot us from behind. We both die. So, how's about you here?
Leading on from gentrification, I want to talk about the working class aesthetic. How it's gained a lot of popularity over the last decade and how the middle and upper classes are appropriating it. The working class aesthetic can really range. I've seen it quite popular on TikTok with all the South London girls that want to be Effie Stoneham going on their daily walks. And the thing is, it isn't just your fashion or your hair or your makeup, it's also your accent, your use of language and your music taste, among with lots of other things. And the thing is, I do understand that accents and language use really does change over the years depending on where you're living and who you associate with, you know, different people from different areas, so you start to sort of pick little things up. You can even look at my old videos and see how much my language use and accent has changed over the years. I was in a relationship for 3 years, I started working in central London for nearly 3 years, I started associating with a lot more girls who were from Essex, and over time all of that combined did alter my accent a bit. But to me, there's a big difference between your accent altering and you slightly changing the language you use over the course of a few years versus going to university, starting to listen to grime and drum and bass, and all of a sudden you start saying my G, bless, and what you saying. What you saying does not sound right coming out of my mouth. Just reminds me of that the TikTok where it's like, oh, that's dirty, what is that, garage? And it sounds like I'm trying to gatekeep listening to certain music and wearing a puffer coat. I'm not, alright? I'm middle class and I wear tracksuits and listen to drum and bass. But it's just that sudden change from being extremely posh to saying fam, bless, and what you saying every 5 seconds. It's just a bit like you're forcing it. it's just a bit transparent, it's just a bit embarrassing. And the worst part about this trend is a lot of these people who appropriate working class culture, listen to grime music, wear tracksuits and puffer coats, use language like wagwan and bless and what you saying. They do all that, but they will slag off the working class as soon as they get the chance. I even saw a TikTok the other day of someone saying kill all chavs. I'm not even joking. And they'll also vote Conservative, a party which purposely targets the most vulnerable people in society, aka the working class and ethnic minorities. Or they'll vote Labour for a few years, mostly because all their friends do and they don't want to seem like a massive dick. But as soon as they graduate and get a well-paid job through a connection that their dad has, they suddenly start voting Conservative again. It just rubs me up the wrong way, because it's like you're sort of dipping your toe into the working class struggle when you feel like it, and then as soon as you're bored of it you can just resume your middle class privileged Tory voting life. And maybe I'm being over dramatic, but there are actual examples of this. Hetty Douglas, an artist living in Peckham, uploaded a picture in 2017 onto her Instagram story of, I believe it was about 3 or 4 men in construction gear, and put the caption, "They look like they've got 1 GCSE. Already, regardless of who Hetty is, this post is just so classist. Like, imagine just taking a picture of a group of men who, I believe they were scaffolders, you don't even know who they are, taking a picture without their consent and just assuming how educated they are. Just what makes this situation especially so aggravating is Hetty regularly seemed to appropriate working class culture in her artwork at the time. Her artwork is mostly sort of graffiti-esque paintings with slogans on the top such as "You're a snake," or "You're pen but your English is shit." And if you guys aren't from the UK, this slang is very synonymous with the working class youth. Obviously I can't say for sure what Hetty's background is, but I'm pretty sure she is middle class because she grew up in Nottinghamshire and both her mum and her brother are artists. I believe she said this in like a tweet or an interview. I couldn't find the exact source, I just found this in an article. "I think as long as we are kind and gentle to others, and more importantly ourselves, then everything is blessed." And she also had her own profile on a creative agency called Babyface. The agency referred to her as the first Earl of Shottinghamshire, who currently resides on the Peckham-Camberwell borders. Her coat of arms is a neat little composition of a beanie, 2 tinnies of Stella, crossed her paintbrushes with some potato gratin. What's potato gratin? And obviously, like I said, I can't say for sure what her background is, how privileged she is, but many people did see her as a spoiled little rich girl gentrifying South London because her behaviour is very synonymous with a trend amongst middle class youth, which is embracing working class culture whilst failing to hide your true hatred for working class people. And she'd also previously joked about her horror of finding a homeless person attractive. Like, God, it's not like they're actual people or anything. Nope, they're just people for you to point and laugh at and turn up your nose and be disgusted by. But the McDonald's Instagram post really said it all about middle class privileged artists gentrifying areas of London. They're entering working class spaces to show how real and relatable they are, but are still disgusted by people who are in working class spaces for purposes other than aesthetics. Many working class people are told to distance themselves from their background, whether it's to change the way they dress, to change the way they style their hair, to change their accent and their use of language, to get further ahead in life. Meanwhile, middle class people get to dip their toes in for aesthetic purposes to try and seem more relatable and cool. It's almost like a form of dress up. And if they happen to be an artist like Hetty, a costume they can put on to make their art more appealing to a wider audience. And she can take this costume off whenever she wants and point and laugh at working class people and call them uneducated. If you're privileged, just own it. You can wear tracksuits and puffer coats and listen to grime, but don't start acting like you're slumming it with the real folk all of a sudden, or excessively using slang, or using the working class aesthetic but simultaneously hating working class people. It's cringy, it's embarrassing, and it's classist. Hetty did apologise for it. I will link the apology down below. It was a little bit half-hearted, and she does explain that she's not privileged. She comes from what she calls a normal family. And I don't want to dig Hetty out too much because this was 3 years ago, and also I have looked on her Instagram and she has been posting a lot about about Black Lives Matter, she's been very vocal about it, and hopefully, and maybe she's changed. And another example of posh girl using a working class aesthetic, which took a lot of people aback, I'm going to talk about the TikTok user 420 Bando Baby. I'm actually not particularly going to criticise her. First of all, she is only 16. Going for children just isn't really my style, hence why I'm not going to be putting any pictures or videos of her because she is under 18. And at the end of the day, she does just seem like a teenager who's trying to have a little bit of fun. Let me explain. 420 Bando Baby was a very popular TikTok user who used to post sort of aesthetic-y kind of TikTok videos. I can't really describe it. And obviously, judging by her username, she used to post a lot about 420 and bandos and babies, you know how it is. And in the absolute plot twist of the century, it turns out that 420 Bando Baby is Michael Gove's daughter. If you guys don't know who Michael Gove is, he is a very high up Tory politician. Everyone was so taken aback by this information that it got kind of popular on Twitter. She ended up deleting her account and making a new one, and she has responded to a few of the comments on her account saying, first of all, that she isn't a Tory.
That I'm not a Tory.
And also she said that she can't help who her parents are. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I think she makes a pretty good point. Many of us who sit on the left wing of politics rarely have family members who are as left-wing as us, or at least in my experience. But one thing about this which I find interesting, which isn't a criticism of her, more of a criticism of the right-wing tabloids and media, is if this was Jeremy Corbyn's daughter, if this was Diane Abbott's daughter, this would be plastered all over the place. But because this is Michael Gove's daughter, a Conservative politician, nothing was said. And obviously I don't want the right-wing tabloids to go after her. I'm just saying that if it was someone else's daughter, like Jeremy Corbyn's, like Diane Abbott's, the story would have been very different. And I do actually want to make a whole video about right-wing tabloids here in the UK, so please let me know if you guys want to see that. And also something which really pisses me off is we see a lot of Depop users buying a lot of very cheap clothing and selling it on for like triple the price. I've seen people buying Slazenger skirts, which you can buy from Sports Direct for £8 by the way guys, and selling them on for 25. And another example of working class fetishization was in 2018, the sportswear brand Puma hosted an event called the House of Hustle. It's basically an event inspired by drug dealing and poverty. The apparent intention of the event was to celebrate young urban dwellers, and the party was hosted in Soho, which is a really wealthy area. Puma basically tried to make the venue look like a council house, I believe that was the intention. There was like graffiti all over the walls, there was dirt all over the walls, there was like torn up sofas, there was mattresses. Guests of the event were also given a shoebox full of fake £50 notes which had a picture of a tower block on it, and they were also given little cell phones which greeted them with the message of, "Yo G, what you saying today? Pass through the House of Hustle." Glamorizing living in a tower block as cool, even though a majority of these social housing tower blocks go neglected by the government, especially a year after Grenfell, is so tone deaf. And also the glamorization of gang culture. Now, let me elaborate on this a little bit more. I do not believe in demonizing gang culture. Gangs are not a black or white issue. A majority of gang members get sucked into that way of life when they're young boys, when they're literally children. It's a very complex issue, and it's a very emotional issue, it's a very traumatic issue. So to almost commercialize the vulnerable and extremely dangerous lives of young people is just really icky, it's gross. And this whole event alluded to drug dealing and council estates, and the apparent intention of the event was to celebrate what they described as young cultural icons, which alluded to sort of young successful black people. Are you implying that they all came up from drug dealing? Is that what you're trying to say? And why this is so frustrating is there are so many ways to celebrate the successes and achievements of young working class black people who have made a name for themselves. There's so many other ways to do this other than glamorizing and fetishizing crime and poverty. And I'm just going to read a quote that I found on an article. Again, the article will be linked down below. "There is a clear fetishization of the alleged urban lifestyle by white middle class individuals who occupy spaces in agencies and regurgitate the same harmful and insensitive rhetoric about the very real lives of people in this city. Considering the current climate in London, London, with news stories of young lives lost to crime almost daily. You'd think they'd be more careful about this. Puma did apologise for the event, but it still left an extremely bad taste in my mouth.